Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Editorial. I have a very distinguished guest today, and he is none other than Yashwant Sinha, the former Finance Minister of India, former External Affairs Minister of India, and a person who is very active now because he is trying to stitch a united opposition against the Narendra Modi government. I spoke to Mr. Sinha about why he joined Trinamool Congress, and I spoke to him about his plans to set up this united opposition front against Narendra Modi, and I asked him whether can this front actually happen? Can this front actually take on Modi without a consensus prime ministerial candidate? This is what he had to say. Let's get into the show. Sir, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me on my show. Sir, let me get right into my first question. Sir, why did you choose Trinamool Congress?
Because of the fact that the BJP had challenged TMC in West Bengal. And they created such a hype if it was a national election. I wanted TMC to win. I wanted BJP to lose. And therefore, you'll recall that I joined the TMC before the elections and made whatever contribution was possible for me to make. And I was acutely aware of the fact that I was joining a party which was regional, which was confined to West Bengal only so far. But the West Bengal elections, assembly elections, had a national reach because of the hype which BJP had created. It became a national election. And therefore, as I said, because I wanted to strengthen TMC, I wanted them to win, I wanted the BJP to lose, I decided to join the TMC.
Sir, why not RJD, sir? Just a question. Because that was the same thing there too. RJD was competing with BJP and, why not RJD?
Well, there are a number of issues about as far as that question is concerned. Why not Samajwadi Party in UP? Why not Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi? So there is no end to this question. But at that point of time, the battle was in Bengal, and I decided to join forces with Mamata Banerjee so that BJP could lose.
You started your political career 1981 with Janata Dal. 1996, you joined Bharatiya Janata Party. Sir, when you joined Bharatiya Janata Party, did you believe in the right-wing ideology?
Let me tell you this. I joined the Bharatiya Janata Party at a time when it was being led by Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Shri L.K. Advani. That Bharatiya Janata Party was very different in its approach to national issues than the Bharatiya Janata Party of today. So, though they were supported by the RSS, they did not follow the ideology of RSS. In fact, I can tell you a number of occasions where Mr. Vajpayee himself told me not to toe the RSS line in economic policy and do what was the best for the country. And therefore, the party and the government functioned fairly independently of RSS. I remember we had meetings with RSS leadership, and I was not against the meetings. In fact, I was in favor of meeting the RSS leaders so that we could explain to them why we were doing in government what we were doing. And we had many such meetings where such an explanation satisfied them, because we found that their criticism was often uninformed criticism. So during Mr. Vajpayee's tenure as leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party, one did not feel the pinch at all of Hindutva or of extremism or of anything that is so evident.
Sir, when the Rath Yatra was happening, at that point in time, didn't you feel a little out of place? Because, sir, most of your tall leaders were ex-RSS members, be it Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji or be it L.K. Advani ji and even Gadkari.
I joined the BJP after the Rath Yatra.
Yes.
I joined it in November 1993, as you will recall.
Yes.
And that BJP, despite the Rath Yatra and despite whatever had happened in Ayodhya on 6th December 1992, was a much mellowed party. In fact, I'd like to give an example. Wherever I had been, whichever party I have been a draftsman, I was called upon to draft statements and things. So in a meeting of the top leadership of the BJP, in which both Mr. Advani and Mr. Vajpayee were present, I was asked to draft a statement. This must have been at the end of 93. And I drafted that statement. There was no mention of the Ayodhya issue, the Ram temple in Ayodhya. It was, my statement was considered by the top leadership of the BJP. And then Mr. Malkani, I remember, almost apologetically pointed out that there is no reference to the Ram temple in Ayodhya. And if there is no reference, then the media will say that we have abandoned that commitment. So I was advised that I could include a sentence on Ram Mandir, which I did, and the statement was approved and it was issued. I'm mentioning this only to point out that while Ram Mandir was a commitment of the BJP, after 6th December 1992, BJP leadership was much mellow. And in Mr. Vajpayee's government, you will recall that the BJP's point of view was very clear, stand was very clear, that as far as the Mandir issue was concerned, it will happen only if there is a court order or there is consensus between the two communities. That was the stand of the BJP. And ultimately, it was the court which settled the issue. And good for the country that the court settled the issue.
But one can't deny the fact that BJP came into power, BJP came into prominence with the Ram Mandir issue, sir. That one can't deny that fact, can one?
No, one can't deny that fact. But there were a number of other issues also which were responsible for promoting the BJP. Let me make a frank admission to you. Throughout my tenure with the BJP, until I left it 3 years ago, I never felt any pressure from the leadership of the BJP to toe the Hindutva line. Never. Nobody told me, you must toe the Hindutva line. And as you are aware, I was finance minister. I was concerned largely with economic policy making and later with foreign policy. And in this, there was no question of accepting or accommodating the RSS point of view.
Sir, as a senior leader of BJP, therefore, are you saying, sir, BJP had two faces? One was the staunch Hindutva Ram Mandir face, which they were using it when they wanted to win elections, and another face which was basically about good administration and public governance. Was it that way, sir?
The Rath Yatra was led by Mr. Advani,
yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
And you will recall what Mr. Advani had to say when he visited Pakistan.
Yes.
In fact, I had a difference of opinion with him with regard to some of the things which he said in Pakistan. And we had to have a discussion in order to settle those differences. So I will not say that one, you must factor in the fact that opinions change, people get mellowed, and over a period of time, it's my view that from the strident position which Mr. Advani had taken through the Rath Yatra on the Ram Mandir issue, was not his stand when we were in government. And therefore, in government, we were looking for consensus for Ram Mandir. There was no question of riding roughshod over the sentiment of the minority community.
So that's the point I was making, sir. So at some point in time, when they came into government, they forgot about the Rath Yatra and they were more bothered about governing the country and to a certain extent ensuring that there is...
I would correct you to the extent you say that the Rath Yatra was in 91-92. We came into government in 1998. I'm not counting the 1996 13 decade.
Yes.
You know, and in this period, even Mr. Advani had mellowed down. There was a real change in attitude. There was a real change in approach. It was further strengthened when we formed the government in 1998.
Throughout your career with Bharatiya Janata Party, sir, did you feel out of place ever because you are not part of the Sangh or you are not a pracharak or you didn't wear the uniform, the Sangh uniform ever? Did you ever feel out of place in your career?
On the contrary, let me tell you, I felt extremely comfortable under the leadership of Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Advani because I was never called upon to, submit to the pressure of outside forces, whether it's RSS or Vishwa Hindu Parishad or anybody else for that matter. So I was completely comfortable in the area of work that I was doing in the government.
In your book in 2019, India Unmade, you made a statement. You said Narendra Modi government unmade India. Sir, can you elaborate on that statement, sir?
Well, that book largely concentrated on the economy and you know what is happening to the economy. I'd like to inform you that forget COVID for the time being. Demonetization did enormous damage to our economy. And if the annual growth rate of our economy before demonetization was 8%, before COVID, it had come down to 4%. There was a decline year after year, until we touched 4%, which is half of 8% before COVID. And after COVID, that's another big issue, whether COVID was managed properly or not. But after COVID, as you know, we have gone into negative territory and the growth rate is -9, -10%. So in terms of national income, if I could tell you and your viewers, what it means is that if you came down from, let's say, 8% to 4% and there was a decline of 4%, we lost 8 lakh crore of national income. And today, when we are growing at -9, 10%, then that figure is 20 lakh crore. That our national income has gone down by 20 lakh crore. Now, whose loss is that? It is your loss and my loss. It's the loss of the people of this country. So economy is in a complete mess as far as this government is concerned. And it is because of the wrong policies that the government has followed.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi had made a statement. He said, we will be a 5 trillion economy by 2025. Now, like you rightly said, sir, 2015, our GDP growth rate was 8%, 2016, 8.26, 2017, 7.04, 2018, 6.12, 2019, 4.15, like you rightly said. Now, let's stop at 2019. Let's not go into 2020 and 21, assuming COVID and others. So let's keep that aside. Sir, with this kind of GDP growth rate, would we ever achieve that 5 trillion economy?
Nothing could be more ridiculous than talking of 5 trillion economy of India in India. First of all, you go and ask the person in the street, ask him, does he understand what a trillion means? How many people in this country understand what a trillion means? I mean, they'll understand lakh, crore, Arab. They will not understand trillion, million and trillion. That's point number one. Then we are talking in terms of dollar. $5 trillion economy. This is, as I said, a ridiculous target to set. It was not achievable on the day it was announced. Today, it looks impossible. And why only 5 trillion economy? I'll tell you, like to remind you, that this government had promised to double the farmers' income by 2022. We are already in 2021, in the middle of 2021. The farmers' incomes have declined substantially. There is the question of their income being doubled by 2022. So all these are targets. They look very attractive when they are set, but they are nothing more than jumlas.
Do you think that the problem with this government is limited to economy, or is it also about administration?
No, I think as far as administration is concerned, I think again a lot of misinformation has been spread, as if this was a very efficient government and there has been no government before it which was so equally efficient. Nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know whether it attracted your attention. We have 40 or 45 central universities, and I read a report that 20 or 25 posts of vice chancellors of those universities have been vacant for months and years. Does that represent an efficient government? Forget the management of the economy. I mean, when the term of a vice chancellor will end, and you should begin trying to appoint a replacement in good time. But that does not happen. Similarly, in government, we have a large number of pending schemes. And if the number of pending is the amount involved in pending schemes, which are pending large schemes, which are pending for they have time and cost overrun. What does it mean? It means inefficiency of the government. So if you take these indices of performance of the government of India, you will find this government is as bad as earlier governments.
Is this government a transparent government?
No, you see, corruption, you are honest as long as you are not found out. This is how our system works. And when are you found out? When you are out of office. So, as far as corruption is concerned, I'd like you to wait when this government goes out of office. Then many of its misdeeds will come to the fore. When Rahul Gandhi said, "Hum do, hamare do," and the way these two corporate houses have been making progress despite the economy slowing down, what does it represent? It represents government's bounty, government's unashamed favor to them. That's why they are prospering, even in a difficult situation. And there is no inquiry. Why isn't there an inquiry into the way the share holding, the share value of one particular corporate house has increased? Why is the SEBI not inquiring into it? When an inquiry is made, then you will find out how this government was completely not only lax, but it had provided protection to that particular corporate house so that it was not touched. So, and then forget about corruption at the highest levels. There is corruption unabated at lower levels. You can't get anything done in this country without paying your way through. So where has corruption ended?
So nothing has changed, has it?
Things have changed in the sense that they have become worse. It is a government basically run by two people. The rest of the ministers don't count. Nobody even remembers their names. And there are all kinds of rumors in the public domain about how this government is functioning. Even as far as the Ministry of Finance is concerned, I am told that the budget is not prepared in the Ministry of Finance, it's prepared somewhere else. There is no transparency in this government. This government is surviving only on the strength of its own publicity, on which they are spending thousands of crores of rupees, and on the strength of certain sections of the media which refuse to see any wrong.
You have been a former external affairs minister, and I want to ask you, sir. Today we don't seem to be having a good relation with China, nor do we have good relations with Nepal, nor do we have good relations with Bangladesh, nor do we have good relations with Sri Lanka. Sir, why is that? Why is our relationship spoiled with everybody?
It is largely on account of your approach. Let me tell you that when I moved to the Minister of External Affairs and I went to Mr. Vajpayee for guidance, because he was indeed a great expert of foreign policy. So when I went to him for guidance, he told me that your first responsibility, Yashwantji, is to ensure that we enjoy a good relationship with our neighbors. And therefore, the neighborhood was my first priority. I did not go rushing to the US or to the UK or to Russia. My first visits were to the neighborhood country as Minister for External Affairs, because I took Mr. Vajpayee's advice seriously. And you are right that today we have spoilt our relationship with our immediate neighbor, and it's not merely Pakistan, it's not merely China, it's with all our neighbors. And let me tell you, mention Bangladesh. What about Sri Lanka? We had in Vajpayee era the sweetest relation, the most cordial relationship with Sri Lanka. And today, Sri Lanka has become almost a freehold for China. That is the problem that we are facing, and the government appears to be completely unconcerned. As far as China is concerned, we know it's not a friendly country. We should have been aware of the shenanigans of China. We should have been aware of the policies that China follows, not only in our as far as our territory is concerned, but also South China Sea. So shouldn't we have been on our guard in Ladakh and not allowed our territory to be sliced away by China?
Sir, let's talk about the united opposition that you were trying to knit together. How successful are you, sir, and how successful you hope you will get in this?
I am one of the many people who want the opposition to come together. It's not an easy task, but we still have time. 2024 is when it should actually be ready to face the BJP. So we'll keep trying. The first round of effort has been encouraging, and I'm quite sure that if we carry on, then we'll have our effort.
Is the prime ministerial candidate going to be an issue that you are going to discuss?
No, that is a trap. Don't fall into that trap. The problem in our country is that we start looking for alternative for individuals. It's not a question of Modi versus who. It's a question of this ideology versus another ideology. And let me tell you, the ideological battle lines are very clearly drawn. The ideological battle lines are: will the values of the freedom struggle of India, as enshrined in our constitution, will they survive in this country, or this alternative ideology is going to take over? That is the real battle.
Sir, whenever there has not been a clear prime ministerial candidate, except for 2004, maybe when Sonia Gandhi and one didn't know who was the clear prime ministerial candidate. Sir, the prime minister has never lasted. They've lasted not more than a year. Normally, it was the case with Janata Dal. I mean, almost everywhere, every time. So, wouldn't that be the case here also, sir?
No. It's not necessary that history will definitely repeat itself. It all depends on how and on what basis the parties in opposition today come together. And because an experiment might have failed in the past, is no reason why it should not be tried again. But let us, this thing of who is your leader, who against Modi, is a BJP trap, and the opposition should not fall for it.
Why was Sharad Pawar's residence chosen for the meeting? Is there a strategic reason for that, sir?
No, he offered to host the meeting, and therefore we accepted that. It's as simple as that.
So there was nothing else.
We like, as far as Ashwan is concerned, that we would like to host such meeting at other other leaders' premises also, if they make if there is such an offer.
So will Congress be joining you all, sir?
Congress is already a part of Rashtra.
Achha. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have another meeting, so I'll not take more time than you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
So that was Mr. Yashwant Sinha for you, former Union Minister for Finance and former Union Minister for External Affairs. Now, he is the one right now taking the lead to stitch the opposition together, to stitch a united opposition. But he claims that consensus candidate for the united opposition would be a trap laid by Bharatiya Janata Party. And he believes that they should not be talking about a consensus candidate and wait till the election is over. That is what he just told us. Now, last time around, if you remember, in 2019, one of the biggest factors of Bharatiya Janata Party and Narendra Modi victory was the Tina factor. There is no alternative factor. People didn't know who was alternative to Narendra Modi. In fact, there was a lot of confusion too, because if you remember, last time around too, there was a kind of a opposition united. There was an opposition united front that was kind of fighting BJP. But the fact remains that there was no clear leader. I mean, the confusion was that somebody said that Mamata Banerjee could be the Prime Minister. Somebody else said that Sharad Pawar could be the Prime Minister. Somebody else said Rahul Gandhi could be the Prime Minister. Somebody said Mayawati could be the Prime Minister. So on and so forth. So there was utter confusion amongst people. So finally, what happened was Narendra Modi ended up getting 303 seats in Lok Sabha. Now, Mr. Yashwant Sinha says, history need not repeat itself. Yashwant Sinha says that it's okay. This time around, people will understand. It is, let the election get over and then we will decide on a consensus prime ministerial candidate. A lot of us feel that if you don't have a consensus candidate, then you don't combat the Tina factor. And if you don't combat the Tina factor, you are back to square one. You decide what is right and what is wrong. Please do write your opinion on the comment box below and let me also know what you think. And till we meet next time, namaskar.